Hi, this is Michael Olson from Fargo, North Dakota. I play at Rose Creek Golf Course. This is Golf Smarter number 989.
So if you play slow greens and you were going to practice the proper approach speed, you would put a club shaft behind the hole at exactly 15 inches past the back of the cup. You would putt to miss on purpose. You would actually aim maybe a foot to the right of the actual hole, and you would try to get your balls to just gently stop right at that 15-inch mark up against the shaft. Because if you play on particularly on public courses in the South with Bermuda grass, which is very slow, it needs to have more speed in that last foot of going into the hole to improve your odds of lipping in versus lipping out. In other words, there's going to be more imperfections in the green and more footprints, particularly if you play in a Bermuda green golf course in the South or like here in Hawaii. And if you play on medium speed greens, you want that shaft to be at 11 inches. And if you play on fast greens, which is almost exclusively private clubs, you would put it at 7 inches. So in other words, the ball would roll by 7 inches if you were trying to miss on purpose on fast greens. It would roll by 11 inches on medium greens and 15 inches on slow greens.
Putting and chipping around the green, drills, tips, and advice with Jim Waldron from Balance Point Golf.
This is Golf Smarter, sharing stories, tips, and insights from great golf minds to help you lower your score and raise your golf IQ. Here's your host, Fred Green.
Welcome back to the Golf Smarter podcast.
Thank
Jim.
you, Fred. I think this is my
gosh.
50,000th appearance.
Well, guess what?
Yeah.
I went through the spreadsheet and I looked it up this time.
Did you really?
I couldn't fall asleep last night going, don't forget to look up how many times Jim's been on the podcast.
Yeah.
And here's some statistics for you since you're a fan of stats.
Okay.
Your first appearance was on episode 105 on December 18th, 2007.
Okay, sounds about right.
Okay. You were on, and then you were on once in 2008. Then you were on a bunch in 11 and 2012, 2013, 2014. You did 2 episodes back to back. We were doing the members only, and they were on putting, which you thought we've never done anything on putting.
Well, yeah. Well,
So
I'm being treated for
been-
Alzheimer's right now. I should let you know that, and your audience. Take what you hear with a grain of salt.
I hope you're kidding, man.
Of course,
I hope
I'm
you're
kidding. Yeah.
Good. It's not funny. And then, so that 2014, we did 2 episodes on putting. It was the only time you were on in 2014.
Yep.
You were only on once in 2016 and once in 2017 and once in 2019. But you were on monumental episodes of 400, number 600, number 800.
I remember that one.
But it's not going to be 900. It's not going to be 1,000. Sorry. I don't know what that's going to be. But anyway, this is, drum roll, please. This is, do I actually have a drum roll? Oh my, I think I do. Wait, look at, no, that's not a, no. All right, shut up. Okay, yay. Okay, stop. Okay, so it's the only times I've ever used those buttons. So this is your 36th appearance.
Wow.
That is far, far more than anybody else on the podcast.
Well,
Almost
I'm
as
honored.
many as me.
I'm honored. And
But
you were
you've
on
also
one time with me. So does it count when I'm hosting you? Did you count as one of the 36?
Well, of course. That was, what was that, 800 when you
800,
interviewed
yeah.
me.
Yeah. Cool.
But you've become a podcast slut, haven't you?
I have.
You're not,
I'm shameless.
We're not the
I'm
only
shameless.
podcast you're on anymore.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute.
I'm getting
You can't have
invites from all
Jim.
kinds of bizarre podcasts. It's funny. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, good.
Yeah.
And how's business?
Fantastic. Busiest I've ever been by far.
It's because you're a podcast star.
Yeah. And I'm in Hawaii on the beach like I have been for the last 30 years and enjoying Hawaii. And
Yep.
just came up for my morning walk and swim in the ocean.
Nice.
Well, that's not
you
good.
told me you turned your phone off.
This is not my phone.
Man.
That's FaceTime computer.
We've talked so many times about how difficult it is for you to just log in
Right.
To this. And we logged in on the first try today,
I know.
right at the scheduled time. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But of course, we're going to have glitches, somebody trying to get in touch with you somewhere.
Well, hopefully
So
that'll be the only one. Yeah.
hopefully that'll be the only one. And we'll edit a lot of, I promise to the audience that you're not going to hear all of us trying to figure out how to shut that off.
No, but that's
So let's get
what's
back
funny.
to-
We were talking about that because about how busy. So when people, that's what I mean. I've been doing so many webcam lessons mainly for people who suffer from yips or just poor mental game from all over the planet. I'm still working with people on their swing and their short game mechanics and obviously putting mechanics, but it's sort of blossomed into yips and mental game. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of things I definitely want to talk about putting today since we haven't done it in 13 years. But I also want to talk about, and I hope this isn't the yips, but I'm really struggling around the edges of the green on my chipping on. I have I have a great stroke, I have a great practice stroke, and then I go and I either chunk it, double hit it, or fly it across the green, just skull it and it goes. And I'm like, what is going on? I used to be really good at this and get it right near the hole.
Are you talking about chipping or putting off the green?
Chipping,
Chipping,
from because I don't like to putt over rough.
Sure, of course.
I want to get the ball.
No, you have to chip it or pitch it for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know that Tony Manzoni gave me this one tip that worked so well for so long of taking like an 8-iron and putting it more upright and putting it on the toe and just do a little putting stroke for it. But it's not working anymore.
That shot does not work if you're out of the rough. That only works if you're basically on the fringe with the ball sitting up in a really good lie. That's called putt chipping.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something that Paul Runyon, the famous touring pro back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, advocated for. But it doesn't work unless the ball's basically you have to be on the fringe with the ball sitting up for that technique to work.
Okay, so if I'm another yard off the green and I'm in rough, then
you either have to do what's called modern chipping, which is chipping with a little bit of wrist cock and release, or you got to do pitching, which is a half to even a full wrist cock. So different technique than what you've been using. In other words, whenever you're in the rough, you have to come in on a steeper angle to get some club face on the ball, right? You can't come in shallow. In classical chipping, you come in pretty shallow, so you can't use classical chipping, old school chipping. Yeah. Right. So it's a little harder shot because you have to time the release. Anytime you're setting a wrist angle, you have to release the angle on the downswing, and that takes obviously timing and skill. More skill than if you're using no wrists. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Are we solved? Is that all I need to know?
No. There's always more than that. Yeah.
That's why I brought you on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I want more. I need more. Yeah. Fix it.
Yeah.
Fix it.
Well, you got to keep your weight
Yoda.
forward, right? Because if you want to increase the angle of attack, you have to. One way to do that is to put your weight more forward, lean your hands forward more, so you have more forward shaft lean. Open the face of your lob wedge or your sand wedge, which are the two primary tools you're going to use in a shot like that. Yeah, when you open the face, you expose more bounce, and the bounce slides through the rough better than the leading edge. The leading edge, if it presents first, it'll encounter too much resistance from the grass. Yeah.
And do I want like on the wedge that I use for my lob is a 56 degree. Mm-hmm. And then there's a second number on these wedges, and that's basically what the bounce is.
Right.
I think mine is a 10. So what are the numbers? Not much bounce. What the higher number is less bounce, and the low number is more bounce?
No, the higher number, if it's the bounce number, because it could also be the loft. Some of these wedges have the loft angle imprinted, like 56 degree would be the loft, for example.
Right.
And the most common degree of bounce with a 56 degree sand wedge is 14 degrees of bounce. But you can get them with 12 or even as little as 10. But I mean, to me, having only 10 degrees bounce on a sand wedge is crazy. It kind of defeats the whole purpose. So, I mean, I've got one that has 16 degrees of bounce. So you want, bounce is your friend. You want to have a fair amount of bounce on your sand wedge for sure. Right.
And that's for softer sand?
Correct.
I mean, we should really discuss this a little bit more. I think it's enlightening for a lot of people to understand what bounce means on their wedge.
Yeah, the way bounce works. Well, the best way to understand is to know the story of who am I having a senior moment? Who was the Italian tour pro who invented the sand wedge? Who am I thinking of? Back in the 1930s at the British Open.
I don't know.
I'm having a senior moment, but anyhow, he invented the sand wedge.
It'll come to you right in the middle of a
Probably
sentence.
will. But he invented the sand wedge.
Giuseppe Sandwich.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
old
that was
Giuseppe,
rude.
my friend Giuseppe. But it was such a powerful weapon because he basically had a welder weld some type of metal, I forgot what it was, on the bottom of his pitching wedge. And he had the club fitter bend the pitching wedge like a lot, so there was more loft. I think it was lead, if I remember right. So he had this gobs of lead on the bottom. And that works the way a keel on a boat works, so it can go through the water faster. Mm-hmm. So basically, when you have bounce on the bottom of a wedge, it slides through the turf better and it slides through the sand better. But if you don't have bounce, then the leading edge tends to dig in the grass or dig in the sand. So that's the whole idea, to provide some more speed, more zip through the ground with a more stable club face angle. You need bounce.
Okay. And for those folks who are playing...
Gene Sarazen. That's what
there
it was.
you go. I knew it was going to pop into your head in the middle of a sentence.
Those Alzheimer drugs are really helping today. That's all I can say.
So for those folks who live in areas that have more packed sand, it's not fluffy.
Yeah. You want lower bounce. Yeah.
You want lower bounce.
Yeah.
And then what about if you're playing hard pan and you're going to use a pitching wedge out there and you're playing and there's not a lot of grass and the ground is kind of hard.
Yeah, the harder the pan, the less fluffy the lie is, so to speak, whether it's in sand or on the fairway or in the rough. Mm-hmm. The firmer the lie, the less bounce you need and want.
Okay.
Because if you have too much bounce, then that bounce will keep the leading edge too high during the impact, just before, during, and after impact. And in fact, you can literally even bounce off the ground. You can scull the ball over the green if you have too much bounce. It'll literally bounce off the ground. Yeah. So like in the Pacific Northwest where I live, in Oregon and Washington, we get a lot of rain most of the year, except for a couple of months in the middle of summer. And so generally the better players here have if they have a 56-degree sand wedge, they may only have 12 degrees of bounce, 11, something like that. But if you play in South Florida, where they have those almost talcum powder greenside bunkers, where it's really light, powdery sand, you might have 16 degrees of bounce on your sand wedge. Yeah. So generally what I recommend is 14 degrees on your sand wedge and 9 or 10 degrees on your lob wedge. That seems to be the best combination for most people. So a little less bounce on the lob wedge.
So actually, I use my 53 degree as my sand wedge.
Yeah, well, it's probably a 54 that was bent to 53, probably. I'm guessing.
Okay.
Yeah, because nobody really makes a 53 degree.
And I spread my legs wide and I crouch down. I get down and I'm able to, I've had more success doing that in the sand than using, unless, of course, I'm on a greenside bunker that the pin is very close. Then I'll go with a higher lofted, my 56, and try to just get under it and let it pop up. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
You never really want to try to get under it. Not really. Trying to get under it is your conscious mind using language, expressing what's called in your unconscious mind scooping impulse.
Okay.
Even on a flop shot, you should not try to get under it, right? Because that'll almost certainly make you either hit it really thin and scull it, or maybe hit it really fat. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's that common myth, I guess, or notion of you want to in the bunker, you want to get like under the ball.
Yeah,
that's just hitting behind it.
Well, you're hitting behind it on purpose. You're hitting it heavy, fat on purpose, but you never want to feel like you're trying to get under it. Remember, think of it from the standpoint of your wrists. And your wrists on cocking is what creates most of the downward force into the club head. Mm-hmm. On all golf shots where you're cocking your wrist, which lifts the club head up toward the sky on the backswing, you're basically reversing course on the forward swing. So you're always hitting down. the club head's going down from your wrists, and any golf shot where you set your wrist cock angle in the backswing. So what's getting under is when people go sideways with their wrist, which is called flipping, which is a bad flaw that almost all golfers have unless they're really good. Yeah. The loft built into the club makes the ball get airborne. You don't need to help out by trying to get underneath it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I don't necessarily need a higher lofted club when I'm.
You do need a lot. Everybody should have a lob wedge in their bag, which is generally 60, but it could be a 58 degree.
But aren't 60s really hard to hit?
If your technique sucks, yeah.
Yeah.
But
for middle handicappers, a 60 degree is not necessarily.
Yeah. If your handicap is roughly 20 or higher, you probably don't have the skill to hit a lob wedge well. Yeah, I agree with that, yeah. Okay. I use mine all the time. All the time, yeah.
Oh, I do too. I mean, my 56. I used to use a 60, but I was not getting. Sometimes I would need it for like a 50-yard shot, and with my 60, I couldn't reach it. But with this 50, my 56, I'm pretty good up to 65 yards, and I can go different distances on it.
Yeah,
it's just when I get in the rough around the green, that's when I. I didn't want to make the choke sound, so I just made the vomit sound.
The vomit sound, yeah, exactly. We all know that sound.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, should we talk about putting? Well.
You want to talk about putting? I would love to talk about putting.
Okay, so here's my story on putting. I was never very good at it until about 12 years ago. My dad was.
What happened then?
Well, I'll tell you, my dad was really good. He only got down to about a 10 handicap. But he was like a +3 at putting. I mean, he practiced putting every night, like in commercials back in the day when you couldn't, before there were TV remotes and you had to wait for the commercial. He would just practice putting for 3 minutes while the commercials were running. And he got really good at it. But I never liked it. I always thought it was kind of boring. And I had this round of golf here in the North Shore of Oahu at Turtle Bay at the Palmer course, which is probably the best course in Hawaii, one of the hardest courses for sure. And I shot, my ball striking that day was really good. I think I hit 15 greens or something like that.
Nice.
In like 20-mile-an-hour trade winds.
Wow.
But I missed like 4 birdie putts. I think 3 birdie putts and 1 par-saving putt within, say, 4 to 6 feet. And they were makeable putts. And ended up shooting like, I think, 74 for the day, something like that. It could have been, if I had made all those putts, it would have been, like 69 or something. And so that kind of was a wake-up call. So I decided, this was like 12 years ago. I said, I really don't know what I'm doing with a putter. I better figure this out. So I spent the next year really intensely investigating putting and instantly learned a lot of stuff that most amateurs have never heard of, and even most teaching pros, I think, still don't understand about putting.
Really? And
I totally changed my system of how to teach it, and I've had absolutely incredible results teaching it since then to people. But it's a very different approach. I'll just give you a quick sort of overview, and then you can feel free to throw some questions at me. But the first principle of the Waldron Putting System is the fact that your ball is on the putting surface doesn't mean you should always use the same grip, and you shouldn't always think of every putt as being basically the same. It's not. So in my system, there's 4 different types of putts you could encounter in a typical round of golf. And it's based on the distance the ball is from the hole, number 1. And number 2, how much the distance the ball is from the hole involves line control versus distance control. So here's what it is. So if you have a short putt, what I call a short putt, and I'm talking about for the vast majority of golf courses today, they're between 9 and 11 on the stimp meter. Probably 10 is average today of a decent, well-maintained golf course. There obviously are faster ones that the tour guys play on. And there are slower ones here in the Muni courses in Hawaii where they're like 7 or 8, But vast majority of courses are 9, 10, 11, yeah? So when you're putting within 7 feet of the hole, that's what I call a short putt. And you should think of that putt as 90% about line control, only 10% distance control. Because most of the time when you miss a short putt like that, it's mostly, not always, it's because your ball veered left or right of the intended line. And I'm assuming, you can read the line properly, right? In other words, you didn't hit it on the line you intended, so you missed left or right. Only 10% of the time, if you're halfway decent at putting, do you miss those putts because you blew it by the hole with too much speed, or you didn't get it to the hole, right? So you got to think of that as a putt that's mostly about having good line control. Yeah. So that means it's possible to use a different grip on that short putt than you would use on, say, a 65-foot putt. And I'm loving the timing of this podcast because I was watching the PGA event at Torrey Pines the last couple of days. And the number one player in the world, Scotty Scheffler, has been doing this for a while now, I think for the last year or so. He putts with what some people call, I like to call it the paintbrush grip, kind of like this. Some people call that the saw grip. When he's within 15 to 20 feet, and when he's outside 15 to 20 feet, he does a conventional putting grip. And I've been teaching that. That part I've been teaching for a long time, over 20 years.
And what's the value of that?
The value is the conventional grip, which is sometimes called the reverse overlap palms neutral, where your palms are basically parallel to the club face. You do a reverse overlap.
Which is pretty much what I do.
Yeah. That is really good for feeling the weight of the club head and the speed that your hands and club head are moving. So it's really good for distance control, but it's not so good for line control because it allows too much wrist action and wrist and forearm rotation. When you rotate your wrists and forearms, you're altering the face angle. The club face will either roll shut or roll open.
And, interestingly, that's kind of why I moved to a broomstick, or now a sweeper. Mm-hmm. You can't use the word broomstick anymore when we're talking about lab golf.
Yeah.
Because some company now owns that word.
Oh, is that right? I had no idea.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Broomstick. You can use broom handle is okay. And sweeper,
it's a copyright.
Lab is not calling sweeper. Yeah. I don't know how but anyway. But I switched over to a broomstick. I'll call it that for now because we all know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. I did that for about because my hands were getting in the way with my normal length 33.5-inch putter, mm-hmm. and but I used the broomstick for about 4 months, and I could barely get under 36 putts. Where before I was in the 32, 33 range and sometimes 30, So I went back to my 33.5-inch after about 4 months with the broomstick. It wasn't working.
Anyhow, so in my putting system, you use two grips. You use what I call a short putt grip around 15 to 20 feet or less.
Wow.
Because it creates better face angle stability. So left hand low would be the most popular of those. Mm-hmm. Then there's the saw grip, the one that Scotty Scheffler is using. Then there's the Chris DeMarco claw grip. There's a Paul Runyon grip. There's split hand left hand low, which is what I do. I separate my hands by about an inch left hand low, and I rotate my left hand about 45 degrees to face the sky. So that's a form of an arm lock grip. So my the knuckles on my right hand are pressing against the inside of my left wrist with equal sideways pressure. So the universal aspect of a short putt grip is it creates massive club face angle stability. And it also tends to almost totally inhibit any tendency to flip your wrists. And mid to high handicap amateurs often will flip their wrists sideways right before impact, which is a bad flaw to have in your putting stroke. So that's part of it. So you use the standard putting grip, the so-called conventional putting grip, roughly outside 15 to 20 feet, and one of the short putt grips inside it. Then there's 4 types of putts. Again, relative, I mentioned the short one is 7 feet and in. From 8 feet to about 15 to 20 feet are medium distance putts, and then from 21 feet to about 44 feet are medium long putts, and then anything outside 45 feet I call a long putt. And what I teach is differing amounts of grip pressure, 4 differing amounts of grip pressure, what's called sideways triangle pressure, one of Hogan's concepts, which applies to all golf shots, including putting. That means you squeeze your upper arms, your elbows, your forearms, and your hands toward each other sideways with equal pressure. Yeah. And the more stability you want in the club head, and you want a ton of stability in the club head, particularly in the face angle on a super short putt, the more triangle pressure you apply and the more grip pressure. So when I'm working with a student, I'm teaching him how to be much better at putting, at making putts within 7 feet. He has very firm grip pressure overall. He has high intensity sideways pressure. And he also has high intensity connection pressure. Connection pressure means the pressure of your tricep against your pectoral muscles going behind you. And if you watch Tiger Woods, who's insanely great at very short putts within 7 feet, you can see him do that. Now, he doesn't do it on longer putts. You can see him kind of fit particularly his left tricep against his left pec and press it there when he's putting within roughly 7 feet. So in that type of a putt, there should be no slack in the system at all, meaning your upper arm should stay glued to your pecs anytime you're putting within 7 feet. Yeah. Whereas on a putt that's outside 45 feet, you need to have some sideways motion of your upper arms brushing against your pecs, moving sideways against your pecs, still touching your pecs, but they're moving. Yeah, because you have to make a bigger stroke. So you couldn't use a connection pressure stroke on a longer putt because you wouldn't move the putter hardly any distance in space, right? So we've got 4 different amounts of sideways pressure, connection pressure, grip pressure, and then the 4th one is called ring the flannel. Have you ever heard Hogan talk about ring the flannel pressure? You know what that is?
Never talked to Hogan.
Oh, you should talk to him. He's fantastic. He's really good at parties. He's very entertaining. Yeah.
I'll make sure if I have one, I'll invite him.
Yeah, you should invite him over. Yeah. Just you got to watch the martinis. Too many martinis. He gets a little.
We'll get him for episode 1000.
Oh, there you go. The ghost of Ben Hogan on Golf Smarter. That would be
no. We'll just get Hogan. I'm not going.
Not
for
even
ghosts.
The ghost. Oh, okay.
No.
But anyhow, he learned this from a Scottish touring pro. And he applied it to all his golf shots, full shots, short game shots, and putts. But what you do is once you take the proper grip, you gently squeeze each hand toward each other in a twisting motion. So your left hand on the putting grip twists like 1/8 of an inch to the right, and your right hand twists 1/8 of an inch to the left with equal pressure. So it's almost like ring the flannel is the Scottish term for wringing a wet towel dry. So it's like you're not physically moving your fingers on the handle. That would be a mistake, but you're only doing it with your muscles without actually moving your fingers. So I'm talking really, really, really subtle pressure, right? But when I'm doing a very short putt, I have a higher intensity ring the flannel pressure than I do on a 65-foot putt, right? I basically have almost none on a long putt, and I have a lot on a short putt. That's the idea. And again, because we need more club face stability on a short putt, and we need more feel awareness for how big a motion and how fast a motion on longer putts for distance control, because long putts are mostly about distance control, not line control.
Okay, I am such a lab rat. I am so enamored with lab golf, and I know not everybody's bought into it yet probably because of price. But one of the things that they talk about and that they're trying to, they have scientifically cured is torque, right? Is take the torque out. And I hear you saying a lot of things about twisting and avoiding the twisting. And that's what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about. That's right.
Why wouldn't you have a putter that just, now that they're available, why don't you get a putter that prevents that?
Yeah, so the lab putters will absolutely create a more stable face angle during the stroke, but it still doesn't eliminate instability.
Okay.
That you have to do as a skilled athlete. You have to learn how to maintain a neutral putter face angle to your path throughout the stroke. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And this gets to something else. I mentioned Tiger. There's a I think mistaken view that Tiger has sort of promulgated called releasing the putter, which is the idea. When you talk about releasing the club face in a long game shot and in a few short game shots, it means that just before impact and just after, the toe is moving faster than the heel. So there's independent face angle rotation, independent of the path. That's not really a thing in putting, based on my research, right? It doesn't actually release. Now, you can do it, and Tiger does do it. He does rotate the toe a little faster than the heel. He uses his wrists. He's using very old school putting methods that he learned as a child, right? Yeah. And you can certainly do it that way. That's what I'm saying. I mean, you can do it that way, but why would you? Most amateurs basically suck at keeping the face angle stable. I mean, people that I play golf with who are average players, they miss a lot of makeable putts within 7 or 8 feet because their face angle is rotating either too much toe past the heel, which means they miss it left if they're right-handed, or they go the other way and they roll the face open and they miss to the right. So what I teach, which goes along with the lab thing, is even on long putts, I want the face angle to be stable throughout. I don't want any club face rotation at all. I think that's just a myth that you need to have that. You know?
Yeah. Oh, are you done?
No.
Usually,
no. I was waiting for you.
Keep going, please.
Okay.
No. Please keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So the idea is when you have connection pressure, which again is the upper arm pressing against your pecs, like in the behind you direction, and when you have sideways pressure, and when you have ring the flannel pressure, and when you have firmer grip pressure, the combination of those 4 things, to the highest extent that I advocate, which again is nowhere near maximum, it's still pretty subtle, that does something I call it takes the slack out of the system. And the reason why I was a poor putter until 12 years ago is I had way too much slack in the system. And I can guarantee anybody who's listening this, 99.999% of people listening to this podcast have way too much slack in the system. The system is the so-called triangle of your shoulder girdle and your 2 arms. And when you have slack in the system, and it could be anywhere from your fingertips all the way up into your armpits, the very fact that there's give or slack or not being taut enough, no tautness, allows the face angle to rotate open or shut and allows your path to be inconsistent. And you want a neutral path and you want a stable club face that stays neutral to the path. And you can't have that when you have a lot of slack in the system. So removing the slack is why we do those 4 things, especially on a very short putt. And having a little bit of slack on a really long putt is good because a little bit of slack in the system on a longer putt gives you better distance control. Does that make sense?
Yes. Because distance control is critical.
Yeah.
So what kind of drills can we do so that we can ingrain this and make this, unconscious competence?
Well, there's various training aids on the market. They're often called the putting tripod is one of them. And it's 2 fiberglass poles that are about they're about 4 feet long that connect with a clamp on the shaft of your putter below the grip. And the poles themselves go underneath your armpits. So it looks like this V-shaped device that's underneath your armpits. And then you simply squeeze your upper arms and your forearms and elbows toward each other, again, with the sideways pressure. So basically, this really works. This gives you the sideways pressure almost automatically. I highly recommend some type of a putting tripod aid like that for people learning to take the slack out. Yeah.
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 I've never heard you, talk about aids that offer value.
Yeah, that's a good one. The other way you can think of it is just strategically is anytime you're putting, and again, I'm not talking about uphill. I'm talking about a level putt. Obviously, you got to adjust for uphill, downhill. But anytime you're putting around 45 feet or more, you have to think of that putt as, first of all, your odds of making it are close to 0%, right? So what you're really trying to do is not 3-putt from there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that means your first putt has to be reasonably close to the hole within a 3-foot circle. And again, most people, when they 3-putt, it's not because they're like 8 feet left or right of the hole when the ball stops. It's because they're 8 feet short or 8 feet long of the hole.
That's true.
Right? So distance control is so I say, think of that as 90%. That putt is 90% about distance control, only 10% about line control. And when you're putting from about 21 feet to about 44 feet, what I call medium long, it's like 70% distance control, 30% line control. And when you're putting from around 8 feet to about 15, 20 feet, it's like 50-50 line control, distance control. And when you're putting 7 feet or less, it's 90% line control, only 10% distance control. Yeah. And so that's partly why I want people to use 2 putting grips. A putting grip for sure outside 15, 20 feet that promotes good distance control, and a different putting grip within 15, 20 feet that promotes better line control. And then along with what I mentioned earlier, having varying amounts of ring to flannel pressure, connection pressure, sideways pressure, grip pressure. I mean, most of my students, when I show them my grip pressure on a putt within 7 feet, they're shocked how firm it is. Because there's this myth that as the putts get shorter, you can hold on lighter. And all I can say is if you want to get the putting yips, do that. In fact, so many of the students I work with who have putting yips, they mistakenly think I got to hold on really light with pressure. That's like inviting the yip in, right? Because you're starting out with so much slack in your fingers that it invites the fingers tightening up. Whereas if you start out tight, they're already tight. There's no more room for the yip to come in, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever played with anybody who had 2 different grips when they putt.
Well, apparently you haven't been playing with Scotty lately then.
Yeah.
Or Phil.
No, I've not. No, I've not.
Yeah, Phil started doing that about 4 or 5 years ago. There are about 10% of the guys on tour, I would guess, are using 2 grips and have been for the last, starting about 5 years ago. It's gotten to be a thing now. Yeah. I think 20 years from now, everybody will be doing it. There's no reason not to do it. There really isn't. There's such an advantage, you know.
I'm fascinated by if you're short or long and you're at 10 feet, you have a less chance of putting it in is if you're 7 or 8 feet wide, left or right.
On long putts. I'm talking on very long putts, yeah.
On long putts.
Yeah.
And that's interesting to me because it kind of rings true. I was like, oh yeah, I sink the ones that I miss the read, but if I miss the distance, sometimes I'll be 3-putting.
Yeah.
Why is it then that apparently the tour average, best players in the world from 10 feet are at 50%?
I don't even think it's 10 feet, Fred. Last I looked was about a year ago. The 50% mark was like at 7 feet. I think from 10 feet, they're only making like 40%.
Wow.
They're making 15% roughly, a little bit more from 15 feet. Back in the day when Pels first wrote his book, Putt Like the Pros, I think that was the name of the book, that came out in the early 90s. He had done a test at Westchester Country Club. Back then, the Westchester greens were the best on tour. And he took the top 10 putters on tour, and they made exactly from 6 feet. Their make percentage was 60% from 6 feet for a straight-in putt that had no break in it. And, of course, it's going to be less on a putt that has break, right? Which most of the time they will. Where they put
it is
the pins
Putt
on
Like
tour.
the Pros.
Yeah.
He also has the putting Bible.
Right. The other thing in my system, which is kind of cool, is that for distance control, it's really important to understand what's called, have you heard of the term approach speed in putting? Approach speed?
But let's talk about that right after this.
Okay.
Okay, I interrupted you, and you wanted to talk about something that I've not heard about, and that's called approach speed on the putting?
Yeah. So this relates to both how you master the skill of distance control in putting, but it also has to do with
critically important.
Yeah. It has to do with improving your odds of a putt that actually hits the hole, lipping in versus lipping out. That's the key to understanding approach speed. What it means is the last foot or so that the putt's traveling before it hits the hole, there's often invisible footprints that Pels discovered years ago, and he called it the lumpy donut or the volcano, because people are standing there bending over to get their ball out of the cup, particularly if you play in a public golf course late in the afternoon in the summer. There's all these, there's like an invisible depression there. And, even though we have soft spikes today, they still can make little marks in the green. So there can be little invisible imperfections in the putting surface that you may not even see with your naked eye. Because the ball is moving its slowest right before it falls into the hole, those invisible imperfections and the footprints can knock it offline. So
happened to me last week.
Yeah, there you go. So you want the putter.
I
you
had
want
a
the ball,
great putt going right to the hole, and then in
veers
the
off
last
at the
2
last
inches,
second.
it turned right. It's what was that?
Yeah,
that's exactly what that was.
So you need to know that you have to have the proper speed so that the ball will go up the volcano or the lumpy donut and will not get knocked offline very often by the invisible imperfections, but also not be moving so fast that it actually lips out. And that speed is dependent on the speed of the average green speed of the courses you play most often. So in my research, I've come up with a way of measuring it and then a drill to practice it. And here's what it is. If you're playing on fast, and I'm not talking about super fast greens like they play at the US Open or maybe the PGA or sometimes the British Open. I'm talking about, which are usually, 13 or higher. I'm talking about more realistic courses that average people play. So medium speed greens are 10 to 11.5. Fast greens are 11.5 to 13. And then slow greens, which we have here in Hawaii with the old Hawaiian Bermuda, are 8.5 to 10, right? So if you play slow greens and you were going to practice the proper approach speed, you would put your club shaft behind the hole at exactly 15 inches past the hole, past the back of the cup. And you would putt to miss on purpose. You would actually aim maybe a foot to the right of the actual hole. And you would try to get your balls to just gently stop right at that 15-inch mark up against the shaft. Because if you play on particularly on public courses in the South with Bermuda grass, which is very slow, it needs to have more speed in that last foot of going into the hole to improve your odds of lipping in versus lipping out. In other words, there's going to be more imperfections in the green and more footprints, particularly if you play in a Bermuda green golf course in the South or like here in Hawaii. Yeah. And if you play on medium speed greens, you want that shaft to be at 11 inches. And if you play on fast greens, which is almost exclusively, private clubs, you would put it at 7 inches. So in other words, the ball would roll by 7 inches if you were trying to miss on purpose on fast greens. It would roll by 11 inches on medium greens and 15 inches on slow greens.
Well, I've always been under the impression that you want to get your speed so that it goes past the hole.
Correct.
You want to have enough because everyone comes up short most of the time.
Yep.
Because they're just trying to let it just dribble into the dribble's not the right word. Just drop right into the front edge of the hole versus hitting the back rim of the hole, right?
Well, that's kind of my point of saying this. So this is another way of explaining. When I'm working with a student, I have the student, he and I kneel down on the green. We put a cushion down so we don't make a hole on the green, but we're nailing on a cushion, right? The greenskeeper will go nuts if you see this without a cushion. And I say, if you play on really fast greens, then you want the ball to roll over the front edge and then drop into the front edge of the bottom of the cup. And medium speeds, it rolls to the middle of the cup and then drops. And on fast greens, it rolls to the back edge or even hits the back edge before it hits the bottom.
And pops down.
Yeah,
right.
So you need to practice, again, depending on what kind of greens you play, either.
And also, it's dependent on if you're going uphill or downhill.
Well, you always have to adjust for that, of course, Right.
Yeah. Uphill, you're going to want it to go to the back of the hole, right? And
pretty much.
Downhill, you want it to just kind of fall in.
Correct. Yeah. So you have to practice that. I mean, that's a skill to make the ball go. The other thing is that when people have bad distance control, of the people who suffer from poor distance control, it's like 70% they're short and only 30% are long, in my experience. So the vast majority of people don't get the ball to the hole. When I've asked people who are like that, I go, well, where do you see the target? They go, the cup. I go, no, the cup's not the target.
Right.
And they look at me like I'm nuts. They go, what are you talking about? I'm trying to make the ball go to the hole. No, you have to putt it to go past the hole to have decent, right? For all the reasons we just mentioned earlier. The hole can't be the target. You have to always think a little bit past the hole. Should be for distance control, especially, right?
Good. Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Now, there's been a lot of controversy in the last few weeks about aim point.
Yeah.
Lucas Glover has come out on his Sirius XM show, and he was lambasting. Even Jim Nantz was complaining about aim point because of what it does to the pace of play, and
Yep.
does it work or does it not?
Yep.
Tell us your feelings about aim point.
I've worked with a lot of people, good players who use it, and the general consensus seems to be if you suck at reading greens, and sometimes good players do suck at it, it can really help you to read the green better. There's no question about that it helps people come up with more accurate reads. The problem is it can put you in a non-athletic mindset, which if you know what I teach, I'm so big on not doing that, what I call contamination, thinking too much, right? Paralysis from overanalysis. And it does take time. So it does tend to make a slow play issue, and it tends to make you thinking too much instead of being more reactive. Yeah. So I think if there was a way maybe to speed it up, I'm not sure there is, but if there was a way to do it quickly and then switch over to an athletic mindset once you've done the read, then I don't see a problem with it.
No, we had someone on recently who was talking about he's a surveyor by trade, right? So to him, it's all math.
Yeah.
And he says if you use his system, you can't misread a putt because it's all math. Once it's math, how can you go wrong, right? It's like X's and O's, or ones and zeros. Why do some of the greats suck at reading greens? There's so many ways to.
Well, I mean, a lot of it in aim point. I mean, obviously in aim point, you're using your external visual channel, your eyeballs. That's why you do the plumb bob thing and you do the finger thing. But you're also using your kinesthetic sense in your feet. You're doing kind of a combination of both. I mean, I've been okay. I've never been great at reading greens, but I'm decent my whole life. I think I'm pretty good at it. But some of the students I work with are terrible at it. I mean, I had a guy the other day who was on a long putt at the very end of a 2.5-day school. And I do this as a ritual at the end of a putting school. So I already knew what the break was. So I was sort of cheating in a sense. But I said, well, what do you think it does? And he says, I think he said like 8 inches outside the left edge. And I said, no, 8 feet. It was 8 feet of break, and he only saw 8 inches.
Wow.
So that's not unusual.
Yeah.
So I think some of it, you have to really see it, you have to get down really low. I remember Camilo Villegas years ago used to get down on his belly. Yeah. You have to get low to see it. And then, Pels in his putting Bible talked about his research was that it's just human nature to underread the break. And he said that high handicappers underread it by 300% and mid handicaps by 200% and low handicaps and tour pros by close to 100%, which is, still that's a lot.
Significant. Yeah.
Yeah. And, his explanation, which I happen to agree with, is that because people think there's a point in time where the break starts, which is he called the apex illusion. And he's 100% right. Putts are breaking before your eye can pick it up. Mm-hmm. Right. It doesn't suddenly have a point where it suddenly starts to break toward the hole. It looks like it for some people, but that's an optical illusion. It's breaking way before that, which is why when I ask people, do you use the cup as a reference point for your start line? So it would be center of the cup, left edge or right edge, basically, right? And the people say, no, I never use the cup. I use the apex where the break is. They're terrible at reading greens.
Yeah,
that's part of it. Yeah.
What about using the cup as a clock?
Yeah. What?
Right. And I want the ball to go. If looking right at the cup, that's six o'clock.
Yeah.
And for young people, sorry, we're not going digital here. But if you're looking at the cup and you want the ball to go in, say at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's for inside. That's when it breaks inside the cup. You have to do that for sure. You have to use the clock system. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Or you could just say
it helps your speed control too, right?
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely. But you could, rather than use the clock, you could just say, I see my start line as a 1/4 inch inside the left edge, right? Because it's breaking to the right. So that's where you want to start it. Or you could say, I want it to be 1.5 inches inside the left edge. Yeah. Which is basically the same thing as using the clock system.
I ask friends frequently, it's like, how many putts did you have today? They're like, I don't know. It's like, well, wait a minute. They give you 2 putts for every hole on the scorecard. So, are you one putting at all? Are you're getting close on your chip ins, obviously, but what are the numbers for the various handicap, low, mid, high handicappers? Should they be keeping track of how many putts, and what is the number they should be trying to achieve?
Well, I don't even think it should, because to me, putting is so much easier in terms of the mechanics of the stroke compared to the full swing and a lot of the short game strokes. There's just no excuse. Although, ask the average teaching pro how many people in a year ask for a putting lesson. Like 1 or 2. Nobody takes putting lessons.
Nobody does. I want more distance.
Yeah. But if they did, in other words, I actually can teach people to do as good a putting stroke as the tour pros in 4 or 5 hours.
Wow.
And will it be a habit after? No, they still have to practice when they go home. But I mean, within a very short period of time, they can learn, because there's not much going on. You're basically, all you're doing is rocking your shoulder girdle like that, using your abs, your low back muscles. Mm-hmm. So there's not much to it. But if you're halfway decent, if you can break 100, let's say, you don't want to have more than 32 putts around.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you want to be decent, 32 is a good number to go for. I mean, the tour pros, I think, average closer to 28 to 29, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
It also
when
depends.
When I'm in the 30-31 range,
that's
32, 30, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's when I'm shooting in the 70s.
Yeah. But it also depends on how good your ball striking is, because if you're missing a lot of greens, and because of that you had to rely on your short game to score, so meaning you're good at the short game, you're going to have fewer putts than someone who hits a lot of greens.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to kind of factor that into it too. But
absolutely. Oh, good job, Jimmy. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was awesome. I appreciate that. And again, episode 36 with Jim Waldron of the Golf Smarter podcast is now complete. Thank you, Jim.
All right, thanks, man.
Always great to talk to you.
Thanks, Fred. Do it again.